count. We only get them in as number ones. Oh, no, we do have some number 248s in now, but.
You get hit in the head with that, you're in trouble, man. I think it's rock
I
hard.
had to grab a case that wasn't getting ready to go to a customer, so they're gonna be green.
Is that out of the cooler?
There was a lot over there, but all the others were, that were softer were staged.
Whatever is left, we can get that. I can take the Avos back.
Yeah, I mean, you could see, when we start talking about using a penetrometer for ripeness, this is what most companies will have in their arsenal. They have this big head, and then they have the smaller one, okay? And most people are tending to use this one for the avocados. But the difference, that's the one you should use for the avocados.
The little one.
Yeah, it's even smaller yet, you know? I mean, I can see, because, you know, when I asked the, I called Wagner, who makes this thing, and I said, well, you know, what's the deal? And they said, well, it's another $18 if
Yeah,
you
we use that one.
you use this one. You don't have this one in the, okay. So you know what? I'm gonna stick with this one when we do this, but it's just another $18 for the, per head, you know, and I'm thinking, okay, I guess if you're, you know, like the government had to buy, I don't know, 200 or 300 of them for all their inspectors or, and, you know, training facilities and everything else, yeah, when you're talking about $18 a pop times 200 or 300, that can be an investment, and they didn't want to spend it. But I don't know, you should have the right tools to do the job too, you know, especially if someone else is using the small one and then you're using the smaller of the two you got, and you come up with a different result. Well, you're going to have a different result. That it can be expected. Okay, the standards for avocados, and a lot of people don't realize this, only apply to Florida avocados, green skins, smooth skins, not Haas avocados. Never has applied to Haas avocados. Now, what a lot of companies will do, they'll use the same scoring provisions in this standard to grade them all. And that's what I would suggest doing. Why they never combine them, I have no idea. And I told you, some of these standards are a little old. 1957 is this one. I mean, I hate to say this, but that's older than I am, which is, yeah, that's ancient. That's close to pushing up daisies old. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's old. And it's been around forever, and I just cannot believe that they have not combined them at all, all right?
We only get Haas.
You don't do any smooth skins at all,
We only
okay?
get Haas.
So we'll use the same principles. The only thing is, you'll see in a moment, as a Haas ripens up, it's going to turn like a uniformly dark color, all right? And one of the tough things is avocados have a tendency to start getting a brown to black surface discoloration. And even Haas avocados. If this thing is darkening and it's a uniform darkening in color, that's the way it's supposed to work, all right? That is not surface discoloration. It's when it gets blotchy, almost as blotchy as those tomatoes we just saw that had the virus mottling on them. Okay, the same way it'll get with these, as you'll see in a minute. It gets real spotty and blotchy where you've got lighter green areas of the avocado and big blotches of dark area, okay? 4 grades, and this is again another one of those that has a number 3 grade where very serious damage could be an issue, at least it's defined in the standard. Most, at least they say, are bought on a number 1. You know, I've heard from industry though that most are shipped on a combination. So you've got some number 2 in it. And a lot of the time what it has to do is the texture and the scarring that you'll see on the surface of the avocado itself. One of the companies that Tom and I have done some work with, they do a lot of work with, in the Midwest, they supply all the Chipotles with vegetables and avocados. And so they brought a case of these out for the class one time, and they wouldn't even make a number 3. They were the ugliest avocados I've ever seen in my life. Big sharp fins, bumps, completely gray, with scarred up, with scab, everything else. But when you cut them, they were perfect inside. Delicious. and think about what Chipotle's gonna do with them. So who cares what they look like? So in other words, what the shipper would normally do with that product is toss it. It'd go into the dumpster or into the landfill. And now they've got a market for it, you know, just send it and make guacamole out of it. So, you know, this is one that you're supposed to keep it as it ripens in a warmer environment. But when it comes in like this, when it's hard as a rock, you can put it right in your coldest spot or your coldest cooler and nothing will happen to it. It'll keep it forever. It's kind of it's weird because most stuff that is tropical can't ever be kept at a lower temperature. And this is like the anomaly. This is something that, yeah, as long as it doesn't have any ripeness to it. Once you get any, like say, don't you have to pre-ripen some of your stuff for some of your clients? Yeah, and if you put it into a warmer environment for just a half a day, you can't put it, you gotta ship it. You can't put it back in a cooler. Or what happens inside of it?
Turns brown.
It turns brown, yeah, exactly. Yeah, brown to black, all right? This is one where even in a 48 count, if you're looking at a minimum sample, I just run the whole box. That would be my sample size. A lot of them I see now are coming in these flat boxes where they're like 12 counts or 16 counts. Oh, are you handling anything like that?
No.
No.
24.
24s? Okay.
60s and 70s.
Okay. Simple, for the most part, real simple tolerances, but notice that that middle restricted tolerance isn't for serious damage. It's for one defect only. It's called anthracnose. And anthracnose is in its early stages, is a type of surface discoloration. As it advances, it turns into decay, and it will turn into decay 100% of the time. Identifying the anthracnose is the tough part, especially when it's in its early stages, because it's going to look like normal surface discoloration, or another defect you're going to see here in a minute called cercospora spot. Yeah, I know. Who makes this crap up? One of our clients sent Tom and I some pictures. He said, "We've got these avocados with this discoloration. What would you call it?" Now he blind copied both Tom and I, so we don't know the others looking at it. So what would you call it? Tom writes back, "I'd call it cercospora spot." I wrote back, I said, "I'd call it anthracnose." And they said, "Aren't we glad we have you two as our trainers?" Yeah, that's really great, because now you can't agree on one defect, you know. And here is what I should have done, is the advice I gave you last hour. If I don't know what it is, I should have just described it. It just called it dark brown to black surface discoloration and been done with it. You know, especially in this instance, because cercospora spot, while it's a free from defect, you can't have any, it goes against that tolerance. I almost touched it, didn't I? And the anthracnose goes against that tolerance. So there is a huge difference to what you call it as to how much you're allowed of it, okay? And we'll get to those in just a second. These got to be trimmed. They can't have a stem. And the biggest, if the stem is over 1/4 of an inch, it's a defect against the 10% tolerance. And what they're afraid of is not so much right now, but as these things ripen up, that skin gets they're really soft. If they're banging around in a jumble pack, those little hard woody stems are going to start poking holes in the avocados, and then that'll discolor the flesh. All right? That's why it's a defect. Scarring, now we're looking at a percentage of the surface. And the best way, you know, we've seen these circle guides that we have over there. The best way to determine percentages of a surface is just to do this. There's 50%, 50-50. I'm going to bring this around this way, if I can get it to stay. Maybe. Here we have 25s. And you can keep going with rubber bands, and you can teach yourself what each percentage of the surface is. You know, how you can get down to 10%, you know. You can run another one around this way, and now I think you're down to 12.5% areas, you know, each individual area. So that's the best way to teach yourself how to determine percentages of the surface. This is one more way these standards define defects. It's not just aggregate areas of circles. Sometimes you'll get rectangular areas. We'll talk about that, like the watermelons. They do rectangular areas. Now we're talking about a percentage of the surface, and then the other way would be if it materially or seriously detracts. All right? And a lot of times when, here's the surface discoloration of a Haas avocado. You see how it's green and brown and black at the same time? It's not uniformly turning that darker color. That's where you're going to have to start worrying about the surface discoloration. All right? Scarring, I don't know, how much scarring do you see on the Haas's? This is normally an issue with green skins, the smooth skins, a lot more than it is the Haas.
I don't see much.
Not at all?
I see it
I see a little bit maybe on the number 2s, but majority of the avocados I get in, I
Okay.
very rarely have any issues with.
How about any of these, and it really is, it's a field-borne, an orchard-borne disease is scab, and scab affects a lot of different commodities that we look at, and it just has this rough texture to it, and a lot of people would just call that rough scarring as well, and they really wouldn't be far off. You're scoring both of them relatively the same way, a percentage of the surface. The avocados I was explaining about Chipotle, they were 100% covered with the scab. They look terrible.
We're not gonna see much of that in this building.
Okay. Because most of your stuff is going for fresh market. It's not going to a processor, correct? Where they're, or a restaurant where they're making something out of it. So they actually care what it looks like externally. Okay. All right.
The
Yeah,
only- The only times I ever see any issues, it's not when it necessarily arrives in the building. You know, I might have some that don't come in green, they have a slight break to them or something like that. But if the crop is getting old,
right.
they tend to turn, and then I might see some scarring and some, you know, where they're gonna turn fast, and there's nothing
I
I
gotcha.
can't do to save it, but it's coming out of the season, out of that growing season, that old crop, but it doesn't happen very often.
Okay. Okay. Insect damage, you know, whenever you see any type of suspected opening into the product, like a wormhole or something like that, usually what you're going to see on the outside is the best part of the whole equation. All right, you have to take your knife and you have to, the best thing to do is cut right through the wormholes. Or because this has a pit in it, I would cut through the wormholes and take a V cut out of it, because I want to see what's going on inside there. Because normally if there's an entryway in there, there's going to be some damage, if not some rot that's going on because of the worm. The worm could still be in there. We want to see if we have a live infestation. There could be the feeding injury that could lead to decay, and there could also be what the USDA nicely refers to as frass or excreta, and I'll leave it at that. You know, yeah, it's yeah, so much for avocados. It's sickening right before lunch too, isn't it? All right, but see here, we have these nice two little wormholes, and then inside, we got everything going on, man. I said, we got a worm, we got feeding injury. I'm sure we've got frass, that or the worm had too much tequila. One or the other happened there, and all kinds of stuff going on. So, yeah, that's pretty bad news. It looks much worse inside, doesn't it? Oh, you haven't seen nothing yet. This is nothing. Yeah. We've got, the next couple of days, we got some wonderful stuff to look at, okay? You know, it grows out in the sun, just like tomatoes. They can be sunburned, and with sunburn, we're back to this 10% of the surface, and this, it's gonna start out as this nice yellow color, but it seems as it goes on, this gets almost like a rust color. You know, and it's not that brown to black surface discoloration, it's this kind of discoloration. And the longer and the hotter the sun hits it, these areas tend to get, almost touched it again, get real dry. And when they get real dry, if you take your knife and you cut back that skin, then the flesh underneath it is going to be dried out and usually discolored as well. And here we have one step further, because the sun hit it, you know, so hard, you sun scalded it, and instead of having that tanned leather, now you got this sunken dark spot and you cut that dark spot back and the flesh underneath the avocado flesh is just black, it's dead. Now here we start these discolorations. Now you tell me how difficult this is to differentiate between one and the other. This is what I would just call surface discoloration, sunken discolored areas. Okay, there's one. That's fairly common, especially, I don't know, you might not see it that much again because you're not handling greenskins as much. They seem to have a much bigger problem with this. More surface discoloration. Here we have the Haas's that have a, see, they're not turning a uniform dark color. They're real blotchy and spotty with a surface discoloration. That's what a Haas looks like ripe, but it turns ripe uniformly, okay?
Is the Hass avocado less hybridized, meaning more of an original fruit like an Indian tomato?
I just think they're two separate, I don't know that it's more hybridized or not, you know, because as long as I've been an inspector, there's been smooth avocados, there's been Hass avocados. You know, and to me, if I'm going to eat avocado, just slice it up and eat it by itself, I'd rather have the smooth skin. And if I'm going to make guacamole out of it or something like that, I'd rather have the Hass because it's got a higher oil content. They definitely have a different flavor. At least I think they have a much different flavor. All right. The Hass is by far the more popular. And I don't know if that's just by necessity because, you know, years ago you got the greenskins out of Florida, you got the Haas's out of California. We got very little from Mexico. Now what do you see? Almost all Mexico, isn't it? Okay, and so you get all this stuff out of Mexico, you get a little bit out of California, you get very little, well, you guys aren't seeing any of the smooth skins out of Florida, and there isn't, I mean, there's only a fraction grown down there that used to be grown. Hurricane Andrew took care of most of the avocado and the lime business in Florida.
The Hass avocados are smaller, so probably you can sell more volume.
Yeah, they're smaller, but you know, it really depends. That the Florida avocados, the smooth skins, they can harvest them mature. Some of, you know, they'll mature smaller, but I've seen them let them go on trees, and you're probably not going to believe this, but I've actually seen avocados down there that were that big around. They were family size, gigantic.
And they taste okay?
They tasted good to me. Yeah. Yeah, you make a lot of guacamole out of those too. But yeah, they tasted great. You know. But they got awfully big, and they sold the larger ones that they would sell those at like roadside stands down there with the star fruit stars that were that big, and the papayas and the mangoes that were, you know, like little watermelons. They're on all that heat, all that humidity down there, and they just let them go, and that was what was sold local. You know, they were pretty much scarred up because the longer you let something on the tree to grow like that, the more problem you're going to have with the bugs. You know, and that's a problem with any product grown in Florida, is the humidity and the bugs. That's why Florida citrus looks like it does, as opposed to California citrus. You know, tastes great, real thin skin, eaten up. Usually it's all scarred up because the bugs get on it and they eat the skin. They feed off the skin. That's why it scars it up. So we've got our surface discolorations, sunken discolored areas, and now we have our cercospora spot, which just looks like sunken discolored areas that are larger blotches that have started to coalesce. Pretty ugly. And then we go to anthracnose, which is just a larger blob of dark discolored area, very much like the cercospora spot. Now, as anthracnose advances, the one way you can tell the difference is when it's in its advanced stage, because the big dark blotch will almost get, it looks like it has a pinkish cast to it, and that's the spores of the anthracnose mold fungus that's basically starting to affect the fruit itself. And that turns into decay pretty fast after it hits. That's a mess. You see now those anthracnose spots, you see how they started to almost like sink and they shrivel, and if you put like any pressure on that, you'll probably break the skin and it's already rotten. And then the flesh underneath it is mush. pretty bad. If you can't, early stages, I'm gonna tell you right now, sunken discolored areas, surface discoloration, cercospora spot, and anthracnose. Early stages, good luck. I couldn't tell the difference with any certainty. So I guess the best thing to do, because of you're dealing with the different tolerances, is just describe it and call it SDA. Now, you guys use the penetrometers, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you also set them up on these little hand drill presses? They try to idiot-proof this process as much as possible. And that's the only thing I can say is that's why we spend $300 extra on a hand drill press. And they actually set these up, because the one thing when you're doing your pressure test, I've seen a lot of people, they'll do everything right, they get the right head on the avocado, they'll pare the skin back enough so they can take a reading, couple readings, okay? They've got all that done, they've got everything set up, then they'll hold the thing in their hand and they'll press the thing in their hand. And now your hand is taking on some of that pressure as you're pressing the plunger in, and you don't get an accurate reading. And so the only way to get this to work is to set it on the hard surface like you're supposed to and run the drill press in. And now it's still not a perfect system, because you'll know on these little heads there's a little notch there, and that's all the farther you're supposed to go down. And some people kind of miss that. They go a little bit too deep. Gee, my knee, are you kidding? I can't get it to go in, and I'm pegged. That's how hard these are. I can't get it down to the notch, and I'm above 20 pounds per square inch. So in other words, I've got baseballs. I don't have avocados. Those are, holy smokes.
Do you want one that's conditioned? I can get one that's.
No, that's all right. You got the idea. We're just not getting, we're not going to get any reading. See, and a lot of times when they bring the conditioned ones in and we do it, I got the opposite problem. It goes right in and I look at it and it says 0, because it's ready to eat like now for lunch, you know. And do you seem to have that problem a lot?
No, and I have different, like I have customers that want them, like Fairway would want that avocado, unless they're coming up on ad, I might condition them a little bit. But all my avocado customers take them at different stages.
Yeah.
I guess most of it, when I'm conditioning, I base it on it leaves our house at stage 1.5 because our customer wants it at a stage 2.
I mean, one of the problems I've had, and I've seen this, a lot of stores now will have 2 racks of avocados. And one's conditioned and one's this. And you know, unfortunately, you know, the store we go to most of the time, you know, you get that taste for guacamole or avocado and you want it like now or that evening, but you bring this home. So now it's got to sit for
Yeah.
a week,
And
3 days, and life goes on, and then you think about it and say, hey, we got them avocados, we got to go home and eat them, that just cost us $2 a piece for these, which I don't know what, it's outrageous what they cost now, you know? And then you cut it open, at that point now, they've conditioned themselves on your counter and they're gray inside, and they're shot, you know? This product here is because of all the positive press it's gotten in the last couple of years of how healthy it is. And I don't know if there's been a shortage of avocado to go along with it, with the demand going up, but last weekend at our grocery store, avocados that were about this big around were going for $2 a pop.
Our price, there was a shortage because prices went over $100 a case. Now they're starting to come back down.
So for 48, it was $100 a case. So
I had a
that's,
case that was $102.
that's over $2 a piece wholesale, so what do they got, look what they have to sell them for at the store, you know? They'd have to be going for $2.50, $3 a pop, $2.75, somewhere in there. You
It
know,
only
making
happens
money.
when there's a shortage.
Yeah,
Nothing coming
yeah,
on
real
it.
popular item, okay? bruising, it's like anything else we've looked at that's bruised, okay? Now, if they come in this hard, I think you can forget about bruising. There's not gonna be any bruising, you know? The only bruise you're gonna get is trying to, I guess, push the penetrometer in. Then you'll bruise your hand. 5% of the surface or a 1/4 inch deep, all right? 5% of the surface is a nice big bruise, all right? 1/4 inch deep is not very big at all. And again, the best way to determine if something like this is bruised is, like say, if I've got a bruise here, the best thing I could do would be to cut into it and cut a V out of it, and then you can actually see how deep the bruise goes into it, if it's more than a 1/4 of an inch. And a 1/4 of an inch isn't very much. It's a very shallow bruise. You just don't want anything discoloring the flesh. Right, there it looks like somebody took this avocado and punched it. You know, it's a huge bruise. So, and the bruising can discolor and the flesh and make it mushy underneath as well, okay? And this is the problem that usually happens at my house. After I've let them ripen a day too long, you know, before we do anything with them. And this just gets progressively worse. Chilling will also do this on a ripe avocado, or something that isn't rock hard, and you put it back in the cooler. This is the end result. And it gets pretty bad. And then lastly is just the rot, and this will just be more like a sliminess, and anytime you can run your thumb or a finger across it and it just disintegrates, well, then you got a problem. Now, you guys are allowed to touch product. You don't have to wear surgical gloves, do you? Yet?
We do wear gloves.
Do you does your food safety program require the QAs to wear gloves?
Yeah.
Really?
So are you asking for when we're slicing and sampling things we might throw away or take home? Or are you talking about something that's going to a customer?
If a load comes in on the back dock and you're doing your cutting and sampling, do you have the ability to touch it to see if that product is sloughing away? Because you can't really feel that when you've got surgical gloves on, latex gloves. And I know because of the food safety thing, most everywhere is making their employees wear latex gloves anymore. It's tough to feel defects with latex gloves on. That's all I can say.
Yeah, our auditors pretty much made us, they don't give us a choice.
You Primus Labs?
Yeah, we're GFS, but we're using WQS to do that.
Okay, all right.
And then our customers have their own auditors that demand all these things. We have one customer who wants us to wear a hairnet. If you wear a hat, like if he wears a hat, you gotta wear a hairnet, hat, and then a hairnet on top of the hat. I swear to God.
You know, I see other companies, it's the same thing. They've got the long coats on, they've got the gloves on, they've got steel-toed boots on. It looks like they've just come out of Chernobyl.
I know.
You know, and I'm thinking, you know, you're inspecting product. And I know one of the classes here about 2 years ago, we had one of the VIPs, we're sitting in the back just observing the class, and he says, well, what do you think about our inspectors mandating that they wear gloves? And I said, I think it's terrible. He says, well, what about food safety? I said, well, what about it? I said, I'm not saying that that's not important. I said, but why would you say that they need to wear gloves? Well, if this product goes out to the store and there's a foodborne illness outbreak, you know, and our inspectors had touched it, they could have been the cause of it. I said, how would you prove that? That stuff's going to go on the shelf of the store, and everybody that walks through the doors of the store theoretically could touch that. How could you pin that back on one of your inspectors? It's impossible, you know. And I said, here's the problem. I think inspectors have to have their eyes, their nose, their taste, and their touch to do inspections. I think all of them are important. I said, and so what have we started to take out of this? Now we're starting to take the touch part out of it. Some companies will say, hey, you're not allowed to put that in your mouth. You can't taste it. And I said, your food safety person said you can't taste it. What do? They think I'm gonna take a bite out of this and put it back in? I said, that's ridiculous, that's not gonna happen, you know? They said, no, they're afraid now the inspector's gonna get sick from eating or taking a taste of the product. When I did the scoring guides for Amazon, one of the things to determine ripeness of stone fruit, apples, pears, one of the best ways is to take a bite. You can tell how crisp or how ripe the product is just by taking one bite. And they said, well, you have to take that out of the manual. I said, why? They said, well, our food safety people won't let us take a bite of anything, they'll fire us. And I said, really? So you can't touch it with your fingers, you can't take a bite. Just get 2 of the 4 tools taken away from you to help you do your job. And I told this VIP with this grocery store company, I said, it's getting to the point where if I'm not allowed to actually inspect it, I can't cut it, I can't taste it, I can't touch it, then it's like Shark Tank. You ever watch Shark Tank? You know, I'm out. That now I finally can retire. My wife will be happy finally. Well, I don't know if she'll ever be happy, but she'll be, well, that'll be one less thing for her to complain about. I work too much. Yeah, and I don't know if she'll ever, happy, that's a relative term. So, I mean, I don't know. You're telling me you guys can't touch the product, really, without gloves, when you're inspecting it?
I would argue that we could, as long as it's something that we're just inspecting on an unload, it's going in the trash, or, the person's gonna go eat it or something, but not, as long as it's not going to a customer. But I don't know, I would have to ask Jeff about that.
We have a wash step in between salt tomatoes. The majority of them get washed with the chlorine.
Sure, right.
Yeah, so, I mean, you can touch it barehanded. Just make
You
sure
can't
it's
touch
washed.
it. Because I know, and I should have asked yesterday when we were walking through the coolers, I'm sure, I didn't have gloves on. And I know I touched a couple tomatoes, and it was probably a bad idea, wasn't it?
No, I didn't know you're fine. I give you the okay.
I did wash my hands before I went out, but I thought about it after the fact, and I thought, oh, I shouldn't have done that, because I know the way the pendulum is swung now, and it's all about food safety, and the quality is even, I hope, and maybe the food safety auditors don't realize it, but because their requirements have basically put the quality end of it at a bigger risk now, okay? Because you can't really touch the stuff. I mean, I've seen people looking at asparagus. There's another, do you handle much asparagus here? You gotta feel tips, and you gotta feel bottoms of the stalks. And if you can't feel those things, that's where your majority of your bad defects are coming from, your rot and all the slime. And if you can't feel it, then,
I think we've made things too clean, and now that's why people are getting sicker. Your body has to know how to fight off this stuff. And we don't allow the body to have any exposure to it, so now they can't fight it off.
I just have to wonder is there really much more foodborne illness now than there was 40 years ago, or does information just travel a lot faster?
I think it's a combination. I do think,
You think there's more?
yeah, I think we have more antibiotics than we did 40 years ago. And what do
That's-
antibiotics
could be.
do? They kill your good bacteria. What's your good bacteria do? It's a bad bacteria. And so, and they've done studies, people that take high rounds of antibiotics or antacids on a daily basis are highly more susceptible to food safety.
A lot of,
Grower.
Growing up as a kid, you're a young guy though, but you growing up as a kid though, playing ball out in the yard or something, everybody go up to the garden hose, turn the garden hose on, and get a drink of water.
Yeah.
Think of it. I know I drank out of that hose first after the dog licked on it. I know it. I know it's happened. I know it. I never got sick. Nobody ever got sick.
Because our bodies were developed the resistance to it. You got to expose it to get the body to develop resistance, and now we're not exposing anybody to it, so they're more susceptible to it.
Yeah, good
a lot
point.
of foodborne illness anymore is norovirus from people, humans not washing their hands or sneezing or whatever the
Right.
case may be. It's not specific to the food. Someone's infecting the food that they're prepping with their lack of,
What I would also
Lack of sanitation.
yeah.
back in the 40s and 50s, they just said someone died of natural cause. They didn't know the genome of what caused it, so there probably were a lot of people getting sick back in those days, we just didn't know about it. But the other thing that, if you really think about it, the amount of servings that are served a day and the amount of people that get sick, it's staggering how few it is.
Yeah.
It really is amazing. I mean, there's probably, in America, there's probably 600-700 million servings a day of produce, and an outbreak occurs, once a year.
Right.
I mean, that's pretty amazing.
It's just when it does occur,
It's bad.
it's national news, and somebody, all it is, one person dying, and that's it.
But you can tell there's something to individual bodies, because when that cantaloupe thing came out, I don't believe a single person under 50 died, and I think most of the people were over 65. So that tells you there's something to do with their internal body bacteria that was weak.
Right, right. They tell you to wash everything and everything else, but, and that's what I would hope, even after your inspectors would touch the product during the, you gotta be able to analyze this stuff, whether you're gonna keep it or not, to know what your risk is. It's not just a foodborne illness risk, it's a monetary risk that you're taking on something, and if you don't get to touch it or taste it or whatever, we get to watermelons. I mean, they say that a watermelon's mature, and if you see the lousy minimum pink that the flesh has to be, that the USDA allows, you think, well, nobody wants that. So what they tell most inspectors to do is taste it. Does it taste like a pink cucumber, or does it taste like a watermelon? Does it have sugar to it? And make your decision based on that. We can put it in a warm part of the warehouse, and we can get a little bit more color to it, but it's gotta have that sugar there to begin with. And if it doesn't, well then, yeah, we'll get rid of it, but you're not gonna know it unless you get to taste it.
That is one item that we do a lot of tasting on the watermelon. A lot of sugar testing and tasting.
Good,
It's the watermelon.
as you should, yeah, because, I mean, that is, people buy that with their eyes too. They want it a nice red color, and they want it to taste like there's some sugar in it, so that's got some flavor. They don't want something that tastes like a cucumber. It's like a cantaloupe. Cantaloupe only has to be 9% sugar. Well, a 9% sugar cantaloupe is an orange cucumber. That's all it is, because it tastes terrible, But that's the way the standards are set up, So anyway, I don't really know if you're handling a lot of these. How much decay do you ever see in avocado? I would say you'd see none.
The only time I really see decay is if it ripened, it went too far, and we couldn't sell it, because we always have to guesstimate how much we're ripening for any given customer, and if they don't come in and take it, then it's.
You got to get product, I mean, I guess that's what the tomatoes too. When you get them to a certain stage of ripeness, or you get the avocados to a certain stage of ripeness, and you send them out, and that's too ripe for the customer, and so they boomerang back.
Yep.
And now you've got them.
Yep.
Now the question is, now what? Because I got a ripe hand, and if that customer wants the product that they asked for, it was too ripe, what am I gonna do with it? So is that the part you either, donate it, or?
We have.
It goes, right?
options. We have donations, and we have what we call floor sales, where we have a lot of restaurants and grocers that come in and buy number 2 products,
Right.
or product that is further along in its life, and then get it at a lesser price,
Okay.
or it just goes in our big tomato can.
Okay.
Our employees get to take it home too.
Any other questions on avocados? So we'll get through the sweet peppers real quick, and then we'll look at everything, and then we'll lunch break. Okay? Anything else on avocados? Do you see anything that have, those are the main defects that you're gonna, and I guess the only other complaint I ever hear about is sizing. Because they'll show up and they're too doggone small. And you're basing everything on a count anyway per box, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, sweet peppers. This is another business that's really changed a lot over the years, because we used to get a lot of little dinky peppers, and that's why the sizing requirement was a big deal. 2.5 inch diameter, 2.5 inch length. That was the #1 pepper, and most everything we looked at was that way. And now it's super pepper, Everything has taken on the shape and size of what we used to call Holland peppers, and now they're all this way. you know? Here's another one where a lot of times the industry now is not only specking, they'll spec a number 1+. They want bigger diameters, they want bigger lengths, they want a much higher percentage of minimum color. You know, if they buy a red pepper, they want it to be a red pepper. If you'll see what the US standard allows, you'll laugh. I don't even think you realize how pathetic it is for a colored pepper. Yeah, it's pathetic what they, and this is what I even also hate to admit, I worked on the standard when I was in standardization in Washington, because the pepper industry, before that, could only certify green and red peppers to grade. Yellow, things like that, these Holland peppers, not growing them in this country. So they wanted the standards amended. So I worked with the pepper industry, and you're gonna see what they set their minimum spec at for color. And I said, you know, folks, you gotta set it a bar higher than this. This is ridiculous, this isn't acceptable. You know, and they said, no, we don't know how well it's gonna take off here, so we wanna give ourselves a wiggle room. Well, that was back in the late 80s. And they didn't ever revisit it, so they left it there. And so all the companies now, especially the retailers, the grocers, have just set their own spec, you know, and they don't care what the USDA says. All right, sampling it, this is one where, you tell me as far as sampling goes, how do you sample a box of jumbo pack peppers? A whole box? You look at everything? Because you're gonna count them, don't you?
Yeah.
Is that part of your requirement, is how many per box?
We weigh it and then we pump it out to count the box.
Okay, if you have to count the number per box, then that's a no-brainer. You gotta touch them anyway, right? That's your sample, the whole box. Very simple, okay? These are the tolerances, it's very simple, 10 total, includes 5 serious, includes 2 decay, and the decay is kind of split up here. It depends on what part of the pepper is affected. If it's the stems, it goes against the serious damage tolerance. If it's the walls or the calyxes, this green section right here, it goes against the 2% tolerance. Now, one thing that you gotta watch when you're doing a pepper inspection is to make sure you take your finger and run it around that calyx, because sometimes that calyx itself can be decayed, and unless you run your fingers through it, you'll never see it. It'll go in the rack, you know, and then it won't be too long before you've got a bigger problem, because it'll be into the walls of the pepper, what, 24 hours maybe, if that, okay? There's also a separate off-size tolerance, but then again, you're not messing around too much with this. Too much about that, all right? You're not measuring size on it.
Not really. We do kind of good
Eyeball.
sizes for packaging.
Okay. You know, a lot of the boxes, they'll be marked to a certain size, they'll be marked like small, medium, large, or whatever. That's another one that there's nothing in the standard that defines any of that. So that's something that that's between you and whoever shipped it to you, the vendor. Right? What is a small sweet pepper? What's a medium? What's a large? It's whatever you guys want it to be. Yeah. So it seems the count is more of an issue than the actual diameter and the length. Okay. Shape it can be a big thing. That's what's required shape-wise for a number 1. All right. Now, you know, shape is one of these basic requirements of about every commodity that we inspect. And I guess what I've learned over the years is not to pay a whole heck of a lot of attention to it. That, to me, is not a number 1 pepper. I'm sorry. I want something, this is because you've got this thing going on a slant, that's barely a number 1 pepper, you know. I wouldn't buy anything like that. What I want is something that I can set in a pan and I can lop that top off and I can fill it with sausage or meat or rice or something and make stuffed peppers. I want it to sit up. I can't make any of those sit up. You know, I want something that looks like a bell pepper, whatever that is. And by the way, we're ignoring all the shrub. We're just looking at the shape itself. All right, and then this would be damaged, this would be a choice pepper. And as I usually explain, normally if you took one of these peppers inside, it's almost gonna look like a V or a heart. I think these come in a box sometimes and it'll be marked choppers on it or something like that. It's a process. Are they're probably choice or choppers for two reasons, shape and stuff. And what's the other one? And decay? Yeah, well, and that's one where it doesn't matter what grade you're working on, if it's decay, that gets scored as decay. All right, and that's something that how much of it can you live with, you know?
What about bruising on like the choppers, like shoulder bruising?
Remember, if it's a chopper, it's probably a US #2, so it's got to be at least a serious damage type defect before you score it as a defect, and I'll show you a picture of what that looks like here in a minute. Bruising on peppers almost looks like somebody punched it. It looks like, and it's got this shattered, it looks like shattered, unbroken glass is almost what it looks like. All right, and the only thing you really want to watch on bruising is sometimes if the bruise is bad enough, it will crack the pepper. And when you think about an open crack going into the pepper, think about it the same way across the board with everything we look at. If you've got an opening that goes into the product, right, that's a way for the moisture of that product to get out, but it's also a way for bugs and bacteria to get in. Always serious damage. Okay, if the bruise is bad enough that it's cracked the wall, yeah, you just score it against the 5% tolerance. Well, or as if it's in a chopper, you would allow 10% of it. There is no serious damage tolerance. It's all serious damage, but you'll allow 10% of it. Okay, color. Peppers are supposed to be green. All right. If they're not green, well then you'll see what you have to have in order to call them a colored pepper, whether it be yellow, white, red, whatever color of the rainbow it is. All right, they have to be green. Now, you mentioned this a minute ago, somebody mentioned suntan peppers. Yeah, there's another one, suntan and chocolate peppers. There's no definition for that. I don't know what differentiates a chocolate, a suntan, and a red pepper to you? What's the difference?
They're like brown.
Mostly brown in color, the
Brown
chocolate, where the
stripes.
suntan is got like a yellow, a green, a
Orange.
orange.
Hang on here a second, because I thought I saw,
I thought there was one in there.
That was not something.
now, is that suntan or is that just turning yellow or turning red? Turning color? Let's
It's
forget all.
ripening.
Huh?
It's ripening, but
Ripening.
it's, to our customers, it's a defect that they would call suntan that we would want.
Okay.
Depending upon the customer.
That in
what
a
the
green
scent is.
pepper would be a condition defect. That's turning some color other than green, so it's a condition defect. And most green peppers, if you let them go long enough, will turn red. They usually do a lot of other things like shrivel and rot long before that, but they will turn red unless they're a true red pepper, you know, and they'll ripen quickly and turn red. That itself is a turning color pepper, which is a condition defect. All right, so going the other way, if you have colored peppers and you still have green peppers in them, those are quality defects. You know, you still got a green pepper in it, and you'll see here in a moment. So if these green peppers, anything that's turning any color other than a light green color, all right, goes against the total defect tolerance, 10%. And it's a condition defect. Now, we also have all of this to deal with. All right, all these rainbow peppers now. Holland peppers is what we used to call them, and that's really what, I don't know, you see this more at the store now than green peppers. No? I get that confused look on your face.
I've just not seen the purple one.
Purple, the black ones?
Yeah.
Have you seen, the real popular ones lately are those. Yeah, we go into the store here, I took these pictures, and I went into the store and I said, well, wait a minute, these are $1 a piece. 10 for $10, buck a piece, those were $2 a piece. And I said, what a country. Because they taste the same. There's no one lick at difference in taste. Go ahead.
Maybe you're gonna get here, but, so like, on a green pepper, if this is turning orange, it's a defect. Now, let's say this is an orange pepper, and you have this much orange, it's not a defect, correct?
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Okay.
And this is where you're gonna see, according to the standard, that would be an orange pepper, if that was the case. According to reality, the free industry says, no, that's a defect. They don't want it, okay? And this is where there's a huge, huge difference, okay? So, here is the requirement for all colored peppers. 90% or more of the peppers have to show any amount of the shade of the color that's specified. So, what does that mean? That means every 100 peppers, I have to have at least 90 of them that have that little color on them. So, let's say you got some yellow on there? Okay, so they bought that as a yellow pepper. If 90% of the peppers have that coloring right there, the other 10% could be as green as grass. Those are US #1 yellow peppers.
We called inspection once, and we got burned on that.
Yeah.
It just stuck in my mind, because
Yeah. Because this is, remember I told you that I tried to get the industry, look, you've got to set the bar higher than this. This is ridiculous, because nobody is going to go in and pay for a yellow pepper or an orange pepper or a red pepper or any color other than green and have a little dot of yellow on it on 90% of them, and the other ones have no color on them, and you're going to call those yellow peppers. That's not setting the bar very high. And I said, to me, I think you would lose more business than gain it. And they said, well, we want to start slow. Well, they're starting really slow because it's been 30-some years, okay? I don't anticipate that to change. If I got this load, that you see that picture of as yellow peppers, and I'm gonna go along and say if every grocery store chain that Tom and I work with, if that's how the yellow peppers showed up, they'd be rejected.
We would not send them out to our customer that way.
As you shouldn't, that's right.
We would sit on them for a while, sell them at a cheaper price, or they'd go on and take home.
Now, I want you to think about this because there's another way to look at this. When you're looking at the amount of green peppers that's in a colored lot, you technically have a separate 10% tolerance. Remember, we have our 10% defects, 5% serious, 2% decay. Well, in this one, 90% of the peppers have to have any spot of color. That means the other 10% can be pure green. So in colored peppers, you have a separate 10% tolerance, the other part of that 90, for pure green peppers. And it's not written that way in the handbook, it's not written that way in the standard, but technically that is a built-in separate 10% defect tolerance for green peppers and colored peppers.
Like when we got that pile of yellow and there was like a full row of green.
That was in the box, and they weren't shipped as like mixed color?
It was like yellow and then one row was green.
A row on the pallet.
Oh, they just shipped green peppers, so they plugged the load on you is what they did.
Yeah, but
They
it was
shipped-
like one row because everything below was yellow too. It was weird. So maybe
Really?
it was their 10%, but
No, and see, in that instance, if I took one of those boxes of green as my sample, I would have 100% defects, because they would all be green peppers that I'm grading a yellow pepper lot. And none of them had any yellow in it, did it?
no, not
So the whole box would be defective. Here's specifically why you take samples from different layers, because of that. It's usually not the big shipper you have to worry about. They make too much money, they ship too many $1 million worth of product, they don't have the time to do it. It's the local guy you've got to watch out for. Because you normally will get a higher quality of product from a local shipper, but they also have to pack everything that they grow because they got to make a living and pay their bills. And that's when you tend to find real nice stuff on top and real lousy stuff on the bottom. Because they've got more time on their hands, they've got smaller lots, they've got a smaller volume, and they got more time to play games. You know, I hate being this simple, I really do, but that's the reality of it, unfortunately, you know. So, yeah, so the bar isn't set very high for for the way the standard is set up for color, but the way industry's already factored that in and said, we don't care what the standard says. You better ship us, you know, there better be 95% of the peppers better have 100% color, and we'll mess around with the other 5%. And that's usually how the grocery companies are looking at it. Much, much differently. All right? Yeah. Okay? Sizing, again, you guys are going by count more than anything. All right? And I'll leave it at that. None of these, yeah, extra large, large, jumbo, medium, that isn't defined. You would have to define that, and then you have this 10% sizing tolerance. Note that if sizing is an issue and you deal with a lot of choppers and number twos, it can be any size in the world. There's no tolerance. So you can have all kinds of different sizes in a number two. That's fine.
We get them a lot fixed where you
Unless
have
the
a normal
customer doesn't
size with
accept
a
it.
little baby.
What's that?
Unless the customer doesn't accept it.
Well, see, and there it is. This is why when you say, okay, we deal just with US number one, but a lot of your customers say, yeah, we've seen these US standards. They don't fit our needs, so we're gonna make our own, and that isn't gonna cut it. That's why I said earlier today, you guys have a moving target depending on who you're packing for, you're selling to, all the time. Every hour of every day. It's why you guys are really in a tough spot right now. It's just because you have to please so many different requirements.
Yeah.
You know, it is a lot of work. It's just, it's hard to balance it.
We didn't have a quality control department until January this year for that very reason, because we were trying to do it in the department, we're like, we can't do this anymore, we gotta create its own independent department because it's so hard. And we're still struggling and learning how to do all this. It's a challenge, but it's the reason why we exist too, so.
Right. Well, and yeah, I mean, like I said, I see all those different brands of tomatoes, and they're all different types, all different brands, and then I know you're trying to repack them and make lots that are going to please different client specs.
And we even have some customers
Aye,
that
aye.
have an approved list that we have to go off, so we can't use this grower over here because they're not on their approved list.
Oh, I didn't even think of that part of
Yeah, we have like, what, 2 or 3 customers right now?
it. So certain brands they won't accept.
Yep,
It's all based
their
on
food
audits.
safety is not approved those growers, so we can't use them. Even though we
Food
do our own
safety
food
again rears
safety.
its head. See?
Yeah, we do our own supplier approval, but ours isn't good enough, we have to go with what theirs is, so it's frustrating.
Yeah, and when I can't go off on too much of a rant on the food safety, although I see what it does to QA, QC departments, all right? And when I go too much over the edge, they say, well, what are you, some kind of a money-grubbing, poisoning shipper or something, And I said, no, I'm not, but you guys gotta be able to work around, and here, you've got people that won't take certain brands because that shipper's, but you're repacking most of this stuff. So it's all getting dumped out, it's all getting reworked, you're running it through a flume or something to clean it even and disinfect it. So who cares what happened at the first stage of it? All it's doing is going back in a box.
Yeah.
And that's still not good enough.
I know, technically, if you wash it at home, who cares about anything else that happens to it? I mean, technically, it's,
Kind of what I tell people, I mean, what one of our companies says, one of their execs, of course, they don't do any inspection, but like Khrushchev at the UN, we don't take any insects in any leafy item. And I said, really? I said, so you do realize where the stuff grows, right? And he said, no insects, dead or alive, in any lettuce or anything else. And now any romaine, green leaf, red leaf, endive, escarole, all grows in a V, a cone. You get down to the bottom of the cone, you're gonna find dead bugs every now and then. You'll find 1 or 2. That's why you cut it up, you wash it, you spin it, then you eat it. No bugs allowed, dead or alive. I said, well, I'm gonna have to stop shopping at your store then and go somewhere else. Why? I said, because you're never gonna have any lettuce. You're gonna reject it all, because they'll have 1 dead bug in it. It's absolutely ridiculous, And they still stick by we don't allow, no dead bugs allowed. I said, okay, all right. Okay, we talked about these scars, and this is one of those commodities that tends, especially if you're dealing with the number twos, where you're gonna have a lot of scars, all right? And this is one where it's a little bit different than other standards, because normally they're saying, okay, you're allowed an aggregate area of scars, and it doesn't matter if there's one scar, it doesn't matter whether there's 100 scars. Not peppers, if there's one scar, you're allowed so much circle. If there's more than one scars, you're allowed a little bit more and you have to aggregate. And again, that's based on one of these little 2.5-inch peppers. And again, you have all of these PowerPoints and notes if you want to run these off and not, get into too much of this picayune stuff today. You're going to have this as a reference as we, going forward. So here we have several scars, and that by itself looks pretty ugly, And so here's our scoring guide, and boy, I can't have any more than that. But that pepper looks pretty ugly, God, I love Photoshop, man. And you put them all together, and it all fits right in a circle. And so that, as ugly as that pepper was, it would all fit within what's allowed for multiple scars on a 2.5-inch pepper, and you would have to allow that. That was a US #1 pepper. Not the US #1 pepper they come into my house, but that's a different story. I wouldn't buy it, but I'll buy the one that's not scarred up. How many times have we seen this? This is just, it's insect damage is what it is. It's aphids or thrips that have just essentially fed on the outer skin of the pepper. And it turns it kind of like saps the chlorophyll out of the green portion of the pepper. I guess you can even see it on, I've seen it on red peppers too. It's just easier to see on the green ones. Right? You see this whitish, silvery discoloration. About 10% of the surface is all you're allowed. All right? We talked about bacterial spot in the tomatoes. The same thing, it affects peppers. You gotta push it all together. I'm looking at those and I would say both of them seriously detract from the appearance. I would score both against the 5% tolerance. They're pretty ugly. How many times have you seen this?
You see that a lot.
Yeah, and boy, does Tom and I get a lot of calls on this one. What am I gonna do with this discoloration? Send me a picture. Again, I said, okay, what discoloration? Well, look at all that dark black to gray area, that discoloration. I said, that's not discoloration. That's a variety of green pepper is what it is. Pick up a burpee catalog, pick up a seed catalog, and start paging through it. And you'll see it. There's nothing wrong with those. Now, you may have customers that say, forget it, we're not taking them, because we want green peppers. We get that a lot, that they make up their own color spec, or their own defect, and they classify that. You guys get any complaints about this?
We typically pull it out.
Pull it out.
You pull it out, really?
We can do those to
Because
take
they'll
them out.
reject them.
Yeah, these are the ones that if you pull them out and they're only gonna go, these are the ones you take home and make stuffed peppers out of, because there's nothing wrong with them.
Taste wise.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with them at all. USDA won't score them as a defect. Okay?
It's not fancy.
Okay, we're back to insect damage. And cloudy spot, all that is kind of like where that stink bug got on there, or something got on there with one of those stingers and stung that thing and sucked the color and the juice right out of the skin. And that's why you end up with this cloudy spot. The wormhole, well, different story. And you know what we find with wormholes? That doesn't look too bad right there, but you have to be able to you gotta cut through that to see what it's done on the inside, okay? If you've got one worm or any evidence of feeding, it goes against the 5% tolerance, all right? If you've got a worm that's just crawling around and you can't find a wormhole, you can't find anything that's eaten, I should use better English. All right, it's not a defect. So a worm can be just crawling through the box, no problem, as long as it hasn't touched anything. So, and where's it gonna normally break into the pepper? Right through the weakest link, right? The weakest part of the pepper is through the calyx. So it'll bore its way in, and this guy's starting to do his thing inside, have a nice pepper meal, not bad. Sometimes it gets a little rough. Yeah, so here we've got we still got the worm inside, we've got feeding injury, we've got decay, and we've got frass, and he looks like he had a real luau in there. So, pretty rough. And this comes from one little wormhole that didn't look too bad on the outside. Yeah. No requirement that a pepper has a stem. The stem can be gone, and you could just have a stem scar up there, right? What you can't have is a break in the top of the pepper, because that goes against the 5% tolerance. That's how the bugs and the bacteria get inside and start rotting everything inside, okay? Sunburn will start turning them yellow, but you're allowed up to about 15% of the surface, you know? And now that's quite a big area for being yellow on a green pepper, a yellow orangish area. This is what you don't want to see, is the sun's, can't have any of it. It's a free from defect, and sun scald is another way to look at it. A lot of times with these products, when you see the sun scald, look at how shriveled it is around the margin of the sun scalded area. Yeah, pretty much dead. They would leave them, if they see it, they'll leave it right in the field. It won't go in the box. Okay? So here comes our bruising. All right? You have to have an inch circle. Well, we've seen this already. An inch circle. Look how big the circle is. And that's on that's on a little pepper. That's a 2.5 inch pepper. So if you get these big 5-inch peppers, double that amount. Those are huge bruises.
That's for number one.
That's for number one. Yeah. Or if you get a choice in, it's got to be this, because the damage doesn't even apply to a number 2 or a chopper. So it would have to be this 1 inch on a little pepper. On these, which are probably not quite, I'm sure they're not 5 inches. So it's going to be probably 1.5, 1 3/4 inches is what you'd allow for bruising. That's just gigantic. That's a huge bruise, you know. And this is what you're looking at, where it has this glassiness, where it almost looks like it's been punched. Yeah, that one up there, I'm going to say that top on the left, that's looking a little juicy to me. Again, I'd want to rub my finger across that one or whatever, because I think that will probably slough away, and it's gone past bruising. It's probably decayed already. So, does that answer your question?
So those pass USDA number 1.
I don't say they pass USDA number 1. If they were a 2.5 inch pepper and you pushed all of those bruises together and it was less than 1 inch in diameter, it would pass US number 1. I'm sorry, it would. That's not 1 inch. 5/8 of an inch, 1 inch for number 2s. Okay, that's probably more than 1 inch total right there. So that would even be scored against the number 2. But you got to remember now, when you're dealing with your choppers, are they this size pepper?
Sometimes.
Yeah, if they're this big, then that 1 inch gets a lot bigger. And always, that's the most important thing to keep in mind. Bigger the specimen area defect you're allowed, doesn't matter what this is. Okay? We talked about crush and broke. Always serious damage. Here, this is really common, and it's a judgment call. Even the standard says, does it materially or seriously detract? You know, you keep peppers in too cold of an environment, and a lot of these peppers, especially the colored ones, now come in and they don't have any lids on them. Somebody thought that was a great idea, I think, but it wasn't. It's a terrible idea, because if you don't cover them in your cooler, yeah, 24 or 48 hours, you'll get this.
And if I remember correctly, when we were in our cooler yesterday, you thought it was too cold.
I thought at 43 you were pushing your luck. Yeah. Usually this was one, you know, one of the things I did in my career, it was, at the time, there was a facility in Savannah, Georgia that didn't hire their own QA. They contracted with USDA. So in every other USDA job in the country, you only got called out when there was something bad. Now in Savannah, if you took this job, and it was a 3-year hitch, whether you liked it or not. If you didn't like it after the first week, well, it's like the Army. You're there for 3 years. Oh, I was going to Savannah, Georgia, right on the ocean. I think it stuck me there forever as far as I was concerned. But this job was a challenge because now, like you guys, I had to look at everything, and I was by myself, and there was multiple trucks unloading at one time. So you had to look at things a lot faster. I couldn't look at it like a USDA inspector looks at it anymore. Fast inspections, quicker decisions, you know. And this facility, fortunately, it wasn't a huge warehouse. It was big enough, though. They had 3 temperature zones. And their cooler, their main cooler, just cold, 35 degrees. They had their banana and tomato rooms. They had their ambient dock temperature, where the potatoes and the onions went. And then they had the room for their peppers, squash, eggplant, snap beans, and citrus. That was somewhere between 45 and 55 degrees. And they needed this middle temperature because they knew, peppers especially, too cold, it's going to shrivel and pit. Too warm, it's going to shrivel and rot. So you had to have the middle zone. Most companies don't have the middle zone. So now, it's a roll of the dice. I would always opt to go into the colder room if I could turn the product fast within 24, 36 hours. If I can turn it fast, you got to keep them in the cold room. Longer than that, if you can keep them covered, that would be a different story. I don't care if it's with a blanket, if it's with slip sheets, if it's with some kind of thing that you can throw over them, especially if they're open lidded boxes. Yeah, well, I would look at it that way. Okay. Still probably better in the cold room if you can cover them.
Any recommendation if we were to turn ours up a degree or 2?
The problem is, what else is in that room?
That's,
Eggplant, zucchini,
so.
So it'd be zucchini, squash.
serranos, jalapenos.
All the peppers, eggplant.
Peppers,
potatoes.
eggplant, summer squash, beans.
Russet potatoes.
Yeah, 45, 46, 47 degrees would be safer for all of those products, you know? And you guys got a kind of a cool setup here because you've got separate rooms all by themselves where you can isolate certain commodities. So you could get away with it and just put all of those products in a little bit warmer room, you know? I don't know, have you guys experienced any of this with the
No, not really.
pitting and the
We
shriveling?
think it might have been cycling, because it's
It
generally
should be
at like
45.
45. The big cooler is generally 45 degrees, so it might have been cycling
Okay,
when you guys happen to be in there. The only time I get that type of shrivel or anything is the life. It's been in the cooler for a week, you know, or like with the mini sweets, we generally see them come in with issues.
Right.
So their life, you know, span is a lot smaller than any of the hot house or any of just the bell pepper, but it's usually because of the age a lot, you know,
Yeah.
longer it sits in cooler being.
yeah, 45 you could get away with. 45 would, let's put it doesn't seem like a lot, but 45 is a lot better than 43, you know? And as you get down towards 40, yeah, you either gotta turn this stuff over fast or good luck. You know, things like snap beans too, if you're handling beans, they've gotta be kept in the upper 40s, you know? And a lot of that stuff comes in local packs, in wire-bound crates. And there's another thing, if you better do a thorough job of sampling it, and that means a lot more than just opening the crate lid and taking out a couple handfuls of beans. No, I want to find what's in the middle of that crate, because that's a nuclear furnace in there, I'm telling you, because there's a lot of moisture and a lot of heat that's maintained in there.
And the green beans, and we only get the green beans local, during our local season, but it's really kind of bizarre that in every single crate, I can open an entire layer of these wood crates, and the mold is in the exact same spot in every crate.
Yeah, how about that?
Exact same spot. It's not that corner or underneath.
Yeah.
It's pretty much on the top, just beginning to go in the same exact spot.
Yeah, it finds, it's wherever it can radiate the heat from and keep generating the heat, and they put them in, it's got any, I mean, beans are gonna have, it's like all fruit, it's got moisture in it. And especially if they would pick them after like a rain or something like that, they're field packing them, and they don't dry them out enough, and they just put them in the crates, they put them on a pallet, and they put them in a truck, and they ship them to you. And you gotta get the down to temperature in the low, mid-40s at least. You don't want them too cold, but even if you get the external temperature of the product that's in the crate down to the mid-40s, I bet you what's in the middle of the crate is probably still in the mid-60s or hotter. And as it starts to rot on you, it generates its own heat. So it's almost like it just perpetuates itself. You know, we saw the 2 crates that were left in the cooler yesterday. There's, I would say, completely not unsalvageable. Because now the decay, the little nest had spread all over the place. You had several little nests in there, and to go through that, I'd say good luck.
What would you say is too cold for beans, like green beans?
I would say once you get down below 45 degrees, you're probably pushing your luck. Because, and the problem that you have with green beans is they get like water-soaked areas on them. And then a lot of people will call that chilling injury, and I think other things can cause it than chilling injury, but the cold really affects it adversely that way. So not only will you get the big water-soaked spots on the green beans, but it'll also, if you've got any type of russeting, which is a very common defect of green beans, it'll exacerbate it. The cold temperatures make it get worse. So
You said lower in the box it's like a nuke in there, it makes them hot. How would putting it in a warmer cooler help the decay issue?
you gotta get the what they really need to do is get the heat out of them before they ship them to you. All right? Because, you know, you want them to cool down, you want them on an even keel, like mid 40 degrees is perfect for beans. But you've got to get the heat out of them. And that's why you'll find it like a lot of packing houses, what they'll do, they don't like to field pack the stuff. They bring it into a central packing facility, and almost everything these days is run, and this is where the food safety thing has really helped. They run it through a treated flume. Well, running it through the flume cools the product down to a more manageable temperature where they can now, they'll run it through the flume, they run it up a belt, it goes through a big hair dryer that's about as long as these tables to dry them off as much as possible, and then they grade them, size them, pack them, and it goes into the crates, and they go from there, you know. Beans are tough to, when they're gonna field pack them, and they do, unfortunately, they field pack a lot of them, you're gonna get them with a lot of heat in them, and at that point, you just pray there's not a lot of moisture in there as well. You know, that's why, like you say, if normally the grower, what they're gonna do is if they like have a rain or something like that, or it's sprinkled, or they got real dewy, they won't pack it like, get out there first thing in the morning. They want that dew to burn off, or that moisture to burn off, because they know if they put hot beans that any moisture to them, or they're wet into the crate, the ones that are in the center of the crate are gonna have a tendency to rot. They form a nice nest. You know, and then once that starts, good luck.
We generally don't see the heat, only in our local grown product.
Right.
I see a lot of then moisture build up in the boxes. A lot of moisture.
Yeah. Do you guys handle many beans that come in and they're already like in consumer bags as well?
No, they come in
Okay.
wood crates, and it's only a short window, and a lot of times they come in and they go out the same day. It's very rare, those 2 cases that you saw yesterday that are no longer in the cooler because they got dumped, but they happen to be, they might have been leftovers.
Floor sales.
Oh, obviously they've been there a few days.
Yes,
They were
and they
old
were
product or
actually-
returned product.
That was it could have been a return, but that was when I was talking about our other option, floor sales, because at one point it was okay for floor sales to sell them,
Uh-huh.
but it had gone too far and they ended up in the trash.
Yeah. Pretty rough. So I'm sure you guys see this probably more than you want to see it, all right? The other thing that you'll get is this from too cold
Yeah,
temperatures,
yeah.
sheet pitting. Yeah, and I mean, the shriveling can be caused from more than cold temperature, it can just be caused from age, as the product dries out from all the loss of moisture. This is caused by cold temperatures.
Oh, that really, that is? That pitting there?
Pitting, sheet pitting is caused from cold. Yeah, and it's a judgment call, material or seriously detracting. That's the USDA scoring guideline. It doesn't take a whole lot, you know, be ugly. You get sunken, discolored areas. This one's sunken, discolored. I'd want to press on that to make sure it isn't decayed. It's also getting shriveling that's going right along with it. I guess that would be a good point to mention that, you know, you see this a lot with inspectors where they'll have multiple defects on one specimen. And I've seen inspectors say, well, I've got shriveling and I've got sunken discolored areas on this pepper. So they mark one for shriveling and one for sunken discolored area in the same sample. And I said, no. I said, you can score off size, because remember, size tolerances are separate. So I can have one that's off size and one that's defective and score it twice, but I can't score two defects. So you have to pick one, right? And the first tiebreaker is an easy. You score the more serious defect. Decay beats serious damage beats damage, okay? Where the problem is if you've got two defects that are scored against the same tolerance. I have damage by sunken discolored areas, I have damage by shriveling. I can't score both of them. Which one do I score?
That's a tough one.
Yeah, well, there is a tiebreaker, but what's tough about it is you've got to be keeping track of this somehow, or it really becomes tough. Because the tiebreaker is it's whatever you have the most of.
We have the most shrivel there.
No, I mean whatever you have the most percentage of, not whatever you have the most on the specimen. All right. Now, if this one I said, well, I got damage by sunken discolored areas and I got serious damage by shriveling because there's so much of it, well, then the shriveling wins. But if they're both damaged, or let's say I consider both of them serious damage. I got serious damage by sunken discolored areas and serious damage by shriveling. Only one can go against the 5%. It's whatever I have. Do I have more shriveling or do I have more sunken discolored areas? Well, I'm not going to know until I'm done with my inspection. What happens if I'm on my first or second sample? I got to keep track of it somehow. And then the tiebreaker is, well, it's what I have the most of that's going to come closest to throwing it out of
So
grade.
if that's the only one, you pick that up first. That's the only one you find sunken discolored.
Right.
You find a whole bunch of scarring or shriveling.
I
So
score all the
then
shriveling.
You just say, let's put that under shriveling.
Yes.
All right. That makes sense.
Yes. The key is you can't score them multiple times. And I've seen inspectors pick up a specimen and there's 4 defects on it and they score all 4 of them. I said, now stop right there. If every specimen looked like that, by the time we're done with the inspection, we'll have 400% defects. We can't have 400% defects. We can have 100% defects. So pick a road and drive on it, my friend. Which one do you want? And it's whatever you have the most of.
So in reality, do most of them kind of set those tough ones aside, wait till the end?
Yeah, or they put a little note on there, if they got a score sheet, they'll say, okay, I've got one here that I'm gonna have to put somewhere, I just don't know where to put it yet, you know? But it's gonna get put with whatever's gonna come closest to throwing the product out of grade, okay? We talked about turning color, we already know. Any amount of color other than green in a green pepper is scored as a condition defect. And here's one that a lot of moaning and groaning, especially from the retail industry. Well, the stems are brown. Look at this dark discoloration of the stems. That's a defect. No, it isn't. Unless it's decayed, it is not a defect. The stems don't even have to be there. They certainly don't have to be green if they are there.
And they weren't cut this morning.
Well, yeah, exactly. They're gonna start turning some color. I mean, even these are starting to. It's like almost you see it more in the green peppers than anything. Yeah, I mean these are starting to turn brown on you. It's just it's going to happen, you know. No requirement. Right? They just can't be decayed. Now if they're decayed, the stems are decayed. It's a serious damage defect. All right. If the walls and calyxes are decayed, it's a decay defect.
If you had a decayed stem, could you cut it off, since you said it doesn't have to have stems?
Absolutely. That would be if you guys are working, when you work the product, a lot of times that's what I've seen. What they'll do is if they've got part of the stem, up at least the top part decayed, they'll just clip them.
We can't process.
They call that processing?
We do, for some reason.
Really?
Yeah. See, it would
That's
be different.
one way to get rid of the decay.
If you were in the calyx, it'd be different. If you're actually cutting the base of the pepper, but we consider it any part of the stem if it's cut as processing, so we don't cut it. So we just throw it away. Fortunately.
I don't know what to say, which is doesn't happen very often, but that would be one way to save a lot of product, because if you think about it, there's nothing wrong with that pepper, is there? Outside of that little bit of the end of the stem that's rotten, and you take that little bit of that stem off, and you got a US #1 pepper on your hands.
How long do you think before that stem that you just freshly cut is gonna turn into rot or brown?
I mean, anything that's freshly cut is gonna oxidize when the air, 24 hours, it's gonna start turning color on you. But the color itself, it can turn color and it doesn't necessarily have to rot again. You've cut the decayed portion off. I've seen peppers come in with the stems that have they don't have a whole lot of decay on them. There's a little slimy. And here's where the risk is. They'll put them in a cold cooler. Knowing full well they're risking pitting, knowing full well they're risking shriveling, but what they're trying to do is retard the decay and stop it. And I've seen it stop, where now all you have is a dark stem. There's no decay up there anymore. It doesn't slough off. Now you have to basically get them warmed back to a 45-degree climate, room, in order for them not to shrivel and pit. But you've stopped it. You can stop if it's early enough stem decay, you can stop it. Or you can really stop it if you clip it, but that's not like, okay? Yeah, that if it's just the calyx that is decayed, make sure you run your finger around it. And now, stems decay, and shoulders, walls, calyxes, all goes against the 2% tolerance. Now, how many times have you seen this? Pick the pepper up and it sounds like a maraca.
Yeah, seeds on it?
Yep. And so you basically, I call this a twofer is what I call it. Because you've got a little baby pepper now growing. One of those seeds has sprouted and started growing a pepper inside. As long as that pepper isn't discolored or decayed, no defect. And there's only one way you're going to find out. You got to cut the pepper in half. Yeah, but those on the three of them that you see there on the bottom, no defect whatsoever. It can bounce around all over the place. Only one thing I want to mention, with other peppers, because you guys are handling hot peppers as well. We'll stop for lunch and then we'll look at this stuff right after lunch, as we're a little behind. Easiest standard to work with of all of them, because the scoring guideline, the same grades, the same tolerances as sweet peppers. And I don't know, all of these different kind of peppers, I don't know how many of these different peppers that you guys are carrying. Jalapenos, serranos, now we're starting to get a little warm. Now we're starting to really get warm. Ridiculously warm.
Nope.
Nuclear, and the worst, death. Planet Reapers.
Torture.
You eat one of those by themselves, you're going to the hospital. It's ridiculous. Ridiculous heat, The scoring, just to point to the scoring defect, most every defect is 10% of the surface for damage, 15% of the surface for serious damage. If any sun scald, can't have any decay. Decay of the stems is serious damage, decays of the pepper itself is decay. Decay tolerance. And the only other question I have for you is, how do you deal with this?
Great amount. Motion.
Huh?
Some of the local Mexican restaurants like them hot,
And do you know why?
because they're hotter.
You betcha. And there is a direct correlation between this corkiness, as I call it, and I've heard people call this like 4 or 5 different defects. I've always called it corking. Some people call it thick scars, cork scars. I've heard several other names I can't even remember right now. USDA is very wishy-washy about it. Well, push it all together, and if it's more than 20%, 25% of the surface, then we'll score it as a defect. The Hispanic community will say, hey, you know what? You gringos take all the ones that don't have any marks on them. We want these all by themselves. And I've even gone into stores, depending on what end of town you're in. If you're in the Hispanic end of town, they will have like this. And yes, the more corking, the hotter it is. You get one like this, and you're probably up there, it's every bit as hot as like a Serrano or maybe even a habanero. They get really hot.
So we should start charging more for these, we're putting them in the market.
Yeah, and people want to score those as defects. And again, yeah, you go on. If you'll sell cheap, keep scoring the defects. You know. All right. Questions on peppers? So we got 3.